Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mics, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com. You can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory prices and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started this week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Howdy.
Ruben Bressler.
I feel in my element. I'm ready to go.
You are in the childhood home.
That's right.
Ready to make this happen.
What does your sweater say?
It says, I don't roll on Shabbos. And it's Big Lebowski, but it's my ugly Hanukkah sweater.
Jesus.
Wow, that's incredible. We also begin with our choice of the top comment from last week in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most elegant and let us know what card we didn't choose as one of our top 10 mana rocks. Ruben?
Board Barista is the winner this week, who writes,
Hey.
Okay, my favorite mana rock is Fractured Power Stone. Like Arcane Signet, it's a corner case rock, as it only gets played if you are planes chasing. But when you mostly only play that way, it ends up being in your cube as well as all your commander decks. In my play group, getting one of these on turn 1 off a Soul Ring is a very fun and powerful play.
I have to disagree on that, Mr. Who
The Board Barista.
Yeah, I have to disagree with you, Board Barista, because I have seen that mana rock in plenty of commander decks before. Sometimes you just need to make a colorless mana, and for that rate, you can just sort of ignore the plane chase text. I know EDH Rec is always recommending that card to me. I think the folks over at Commander's Quarters, who I've talked about before, also use that card quite a bit, so it still sees play.
Yeah.
It's funny to look back on Plane Chase, which is basically, I would regard it as a dead product at this point.
Right.
It was kind of cute and funny in a variety of ways. It's much like Arch Enemy, which also I think is, at this point, has been sort of put to pasture.
Yeah.
Fractured Power Stone, if you don't know, is a 2 generic mana common artifact from Plane Chase 2012 and the Anthology that taps to add one colorless mana to your mana pool, actual wingding.
Yep.
Or you tap to roll the planar die. You can only do that at sorcery speed. So, you're not playing with plane chase and planar die. It does nothing but add mana, and like you said, sometimes it's just what you want, which is fine. I don't necessarily. It's funny because you look back and like plane chase was right there next to Commander, which was right there next to Arch Enemy, and clearly one of those formats just completely won out.
Yeah. I never minded plane chase. I think I played it maybe a handful of times, but people still play it now. I think there was even like a plane chase commander game. Yeah. It's something you can still use the cards for it if you still want to spice up an existing game.
I've played Plane Chase Commander. It just adds it is another element of randomness in a format that's already pretty random.
If you ever go to Gen Con, they do these things called celebrity bounties, where you can play with any magic celebrities that happen to be at Gen Con, and usually they'll spice it up where each round will have a provision to it, and it'll be something that comes from Plane Chase, where it's we'll have the Horn of Greed round, or we'll have the telepathy round, and so it's a neat way to. There are lots of ways to incorporate that into your games.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Board Barista, for being a part of the show. Feel free to contact Erin before she blocks you to get your gift certificate.
Strongly considering it.
She needs to pick up her coffee first, so you'll be fine.
I do, yeah.
It's true. So, and
just make sure you spell my name right.
Thanks to CoolStuffInc.com, of course, for sponsoring this giveaway, which we appreciate. And we'll be giving away another gift certificate next time for those who talk about their top 10 elementals that we did not include, which means we get to talk about our top 10 elementals, which is going to be totally
over
sweet.
400 to choose from. Quite a lot.
This was a fun list.
Yeah.
This was one of those lists where we're like, elementals. There can't be that many 430 what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a good one. I really enjoyed putting this list together.
This one was super duper fun. That said, we do have a same. I have a same.
I also have a same.
Oh my goodness. That means we have the exact same card chosen for number 10. Out of all the elementals, over 400, we got this exact one at number 10.
And sometimes I have a theory as to why we picked it, because it's a 4-drop, so we have the same number 4, or it deals 5 damage, so it's at number 5. This one, I got no theories as to why we both chose the same elemental at number 10.
Well, allow me to tell you why I chose this one, and we can be as coy as we want around exactly what it is. I want to make sure that this card was included in my list. A lot of times, my number 10s are, if I said the top 10 blank, you have to have this guy in there. You want to have representation sometimes from cards that maybe they weren't the greatest tournament all-stars of all time, but maybe they were classic, maybe they're iconic, maybe they sort of speak to you. And it's crazy when you think of my God, there was 12 different printings at this point of the elemental known as Verdant Force.
Yeah.
Ruben, what is Verdant Force?
Verdant Force is 5 generic green, so 8 total mana for an elemental, originally from Tempest. At the beginning of each upkeep, make a 1/1 green saproling. There was a long time where this was the best thing to reanimate. It was the only thing, really, to reanimate for a little while there. The only thing that you really cared about is this or Spirit of the Night, depending on what you wanted to be doing. Controlling the board or getting in there. Verdant Force made a return most recently in, was it Dominaria? Yeah, Dominaria, it made a return. It was also in a couple of supplemental products. Like,
it was in a lot of stuff.
Like, speaking of Plane Chase, it was in Plane Chase, among other things, like one of the Commander expansions. That original Dieter Lizzie art is super iconic. I chose it because it's not that I had to choose it. It's one of only 10 elementals to be in a Pro Tour winning deck. It was the Reanimator target in Rexer for Brian Selden at Worlds in 1998. It's like it's an iconic part of a dominant Pro Tour deck. So, for me, that was enough beyond the fact that it's also this iconic, when you think big elementals and also each upkeep effects,
right?
You think Verdant Force.
Right. There's, green was the ultimate fatty color for a very long time. And this was one of those cards that you trotted out as like, look, this is what green does. It's a giant monster. And so when we go back to Dominaria and they were to bring back Verdant Force, which, sort of fits in perfectly with the Saproling theme that they already have in there. It's a callback. It's Dominaria. There's very, kind of brings back all the memories and the nostalgia and stuff. And so like Verdant Force for me was a very important card for a whole variety of reasons. Not only was it tournament viable in its own way, it was also just sort of like a classic, like, man, that's a really sweet green fatty from back in the day, and they could bring it back, and we could still love it. It's still sweet, and it was still playable. Like that was still a very scary card in Dominaria Limited. That said, so that is Verdant Force. Verdant Force is terrific. Aaron, what is your number 10?
My number 10 is a card that I got my first taste of during Khans of Tarkir. I'm not normally a drafter, but I loved drafting Khans of Tarkir, and I love Morph, but I love my Morphs when they're doing something. You know me, I'm a showgirl. I love a big reveal, and so there's nothing more disappointing than when you do the Morph thing, and it's like, oh, here's my 5/6, my little vanilla, or here's my little 4/4 with lifelink. Like, no, if I'm going to morph, if I'm going to flip something over, I want a Bane of the Living. I want some sort of devastating, surprise peekaboo entrance, and no card embodies this more than my number 10, which is Thousand Winds. So Thousand Winds is 4 colorless and 2 blue. It's a creature type elemental, 5/6 with flying. Or you can pay the morph cost of 5 colorless and 2 blue, which means that you can flip it over if it's been morphed for that cost. When Thousand Winds is turned face up, return all other tapped creatures to their owner's hands. This is the ultimate bluff, the ultimate combat trick. You're sort of, people think you don't have anything, and then bam, you have this sort of cyclonic rift type effect. All other tapped creatures is great, and by itself it's just a 5/6 body, so if you need to slam it on turn 6 or a little bit earlier, you certainly can. Or, if you are playing one of the morph decks in Commander, or if you are just playing, Khans Limited, this is a really, really good card to have to just completely reset the board.
Random aside, because this has the morph mechanic. Now, the morph mechanic is classic because it's 3 generic mana for a 2/2 creature. Well, as we all know, creatures ain't getting worse. And as time has gone on, creatures that were seen as rare or even uncommon are now uncommon. And 2/2s for 2, if they don't do something really good, are general just complete garbo and not even playable in limited much these days.
Yeah.
And at which point does morph become 3 mana for a 3/3 or something face down?
Right.
Can they keep that up forever?
2 mana for a 2/2, yeah.
In many ways, particularly sort of now where Magic is and how they're sort of transitioning, and there's these whale things and these dolphin products or whatever they want to call them, where they're trying to essentially squeeze more and more money out of Magic. I also think it's sort of a long-term effect of the pushing and pushing and pushing of the power level, which is, I'm curious if Morph stays that way forever.
Yeah, I don't know. We've had Manifest somewhat relatively recently, which was another play on Morph. And so there's only so much space there to design without changing the costs around.
Gosh, I'm glad you brought up Manifest.
Oh, no.
Number 9. Boy, do I love me some Manifest. Manifest was super cool. They had Megamorph, which was terrible. but they also had Manifest, and it was showing up in Fate Reforged. And this was a creature who originally did not much. Basically, it came out, we were like, whatever, it's a green guy, does the thing, whatever. And at some point, everyone's like, wait a minute, if I can just manifest all the time, it's kind of nuts, which then leads to, well, there was that classic Grand Prix finals with like 800 permanents, green white versus green white mirror, and both of them had Whisperwood Elementals rocking it. Whisperwood Elemental is a mythic rare from Fate Reforged for 2 green and 3 generic mana for a 4/4 mythic elemental. At the beginning of your end step, manifest the top card of your library, which means put it on the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. You may sacrifice Whisperwood Elemental : until end of turn. Face up non-token creatures you control gain, quote, when this creature dies, manifest the top card of your library. This card is ridiculous. And, like, it was seen as, like, it's cool, maybe fun, neat, interesting. No. This card is completely insane. It causes unbelievable board states that are just ginormous and ridiculous. And is a powerful 5-mana 4/4 on top of that. That basically is a 5-mana 6/6 as you're getting that 2/2 manifested card immediately.
Yeah, this card does so much for the value. Like you said, you're getting a 2/2 along with it. It's also card advantage because you can flip those things over. So these 2/2s can be other things depending on when you need them. And it's also just an insurance policy. You can sacrifice the elemental, and then if the creature dies, you get additional things. And so even if you weren't trying to do the manifest thing, even if you weren't leaning hard on that mechanic, it was still just something good to put in your green-red decks, your green decks as an insurance policy, as card advantage, as additional bodies. It just did it all.
Yeah, this card is like soup to nuts. This thing is fantastic.
Yep, still in the cube as well.
Very nice, as it should be. Ruben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is a tournament all-star that a lot of the folks out there probably haven't had the pleasure of casting, although it was reprinted in Vintage Masters. With its new creature type, Elemental Beast, rather than its original printing, which was just Beast. But it makes a lot more sense to be an Elemental. It was a key part of the Blue-Green Madness deck that was a powerhouse in Standard for a very long time, because it has an activated ability that allows you to discard things for free. My number 9 is Aqua Meebo. Aqua Meebo is a colorless and a blue for a 1/3 Elemental Beast. With discard a card, switch Aqua Meebo's power and toughness until end of turn. Being able to turn it into a 3/1 when you're just attacking, to be able to get out your Arrogant Worms, or to be able to get your Circular Logics activated, was not as good as having a Wild Mongrel, but certainly good enough to warrant being a 4 of, and was a very powerful card.
She was also really good in Crazy Rich Asians.
Aqua Meebo? Yeah. She's hilarious.
Nice. I mean, this was also a free discard outlet, which they gave only a few of those during Odyssey block, and this was one of them. So discard a card : is always not dangerous, but it's always concerning that this could be better than you think it is, just for that reason.
Especially on the cheaper the card, the more dangerous it is. You have things like Putrid Imp, for example, which are also free discard outlets and has seen tournament play just simply because it says discard a card, do anything, like literally do anything. Discard a card : and this one being able to switch the power and toughness, being able to get in for 3 damage on turn 3, which also matched up well with Arrogant Worm and some of the other Madness cards. This one had a little bit more of it mattered to be able to switch the power and toughness, but it really didn't have to.
I thought they did a good job, honestly, of balancing Aqua Meebo in particular in terms of the way it works. The free discard. Yeah. It turns into a 3/1, but that's not like crazy overpowering, particularly back then, honestly. Yeah. And between that and when Psychotog kind of hit, it all kind of went crazy. So that said, Aaron, what's your number 9?
I love when Wizards lets us play with different zones. Obviously, I love the graveyard as an extension of the hand, but I also love when they let us play with Exile, because Exile is currently seen as the place where things go and they really don't come back. You can bring things back from the graveyard, but you can't bring many things back from Exile. But you can bring back my number 9. I got my first tasted this card during Sidisi Whip when I was playing Whip in Standard, because of course I was. And this was a fun little thing that you could pair with Whip of Erebos, because you would have to exile it afterwards, and then you could just pay 5 and bring it right back. My number 9 is Torrent Elemental. So Torrent Elemental is 4 colorless and a blue. It's a creature type elemental, again from Fate Reforged, with flying. Whenever Torrent Elemental attacks, tap all creatures defending player controls. So you could whip it into play, immediately attack, and then their entire board is tapped down. You can pay 3 and then 2 hybrid mana, black and green, to put Torrent Elemental from exile onto the battlefield tapped. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. Just a fun, kind of janky card. I love the art of this elemental just kind of sucking everything up. But just giving the whip decks just kind of an offensive ability to kind of get in there and hopefully close out the game.
We've had mythic rares for so long now. You kind of start to wonder, or at least I kind of sort of start to see, when you look back at older mythics that didn't really get there, weren't that interesting, weren't that powerful at the time, there's a variety of ways they could have made this more powerful. And there's also a variety of ways in which this could be like the worst thing in the format if they screwed it up. Like,
right, exactly.
Being able to get something back forever is scary. And so a 5-mana 3/5 flyer does the thing, like whatever. It's weirdly mythic is the way I'd put it.
Yeah.
Well, it was good because the problem with the Sidisi deck was that you could make a lot of 2/2 zombies, but you couldn't get through Siege Rhinos. So eventually the other side's creatures would outclass you. And so you needed a way to just sort of punch through. Hornet Queen was a thing around that time. It was very easy to sort of gum up the board. And this was a great way to break that stalemate.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that last ability, you can't put that on just a rare. You have to put that on a mythic.
It's true. Fair enough. Let's move on here to number 8. Ruben, what is your number 8?
So, Verdant Force is the OG. It is the first, but its space as the go-to green fatty that makes a bunch of small friends has been vastly outclassed in a number of ways. For a while there, Regal Force was like the big green thing you wanted to ramp into. For a while there, it was like Craterhoof Behemoth. And there's a bunch of big giant green idiots out there, but probably none has the staying power that Avenger of Zendikar has. And Avenger of Zendikar, I think, to this day, is probably the green fatty du jour in the singleton formats. Avenger of Zendikar was originally from Worldwake. They reprinted it a couple of times, including in Zendikar vs. Eldrazi. It's a 5/5 for 5 generic and 2 green for a total of 7 mana. When it enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control, and it has landfall, Evan's all-time favorite keyword. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. This is just the top end to end all top ends. You would typically make 7 0/1s. Then the next turn, you'd play a fetch land, crack a fetch land, and attack for a gazillion. This is, it's just such a good card. It saw a ton of play in Standard in mostly those Valakut red-green ramp decks. But yeah, I love me an Avenger of Zendikar.
It's there was definitely during the time of Worldwake and Zendikar, that was definitely one of those swings in power level that went like so high, because we're talking about a world with Jace the Mind Sculptor in it, but also a world with Avenger of Zendikar in it, which is like one of the best fatties they've ever made ever. Has been in the queue basically from the moment it was printed until the moment I got rid of mine. It was definitely in there.
Yep.
And it's still a $7-ish card because it is amazing at what it does. And the idea in Standard that you could play fetch lands with a card like this was just ridiculous. Like it felt ridiculous in Cube, let alone in Standard.
Yep.
Yeah, this plays into green so well. Green is the color of ramp, where if any color is going to have the most lands at any given time, it's probably going to be green. And so, with ETBs, you make the tokens, and then the tokens don't start off very strong. But again, you're just sort of doing what green does naturally of just playing lands. You don't even really have to try hard to break this. And I think that's how some of the most powerful cards work, is when you don't even have to try. If, God forbid, you have any sort of blinking going on, this is an ETB, baby. So, if you're in Commander and you got a Conjurer's Closet, you have yourself a good time. That's what I'm saying.
they put this card in a format not only with fetch lands, but with spells like Harrow. You can play Harrow in Standard with this kind of, it was ridiculous.
Colony Shrine Expedition, I think, was the Standard All-Star with this one. It was an interesting world out there.
It was a hell of a thing, and that is one hell of a card. I don't have a number 8 because it's higher on someone else's list, but we'll get to it, and it's great. I'm excited. Aaron, what's your number 8?
My number 8 is also higher on somebody else's list. One of 2 that I have.
I have now. It does not happen often that I'm by myself at a number, so let me just soak this one in. All right, we're good. Let's move on.
All right, we're good. Okay, great. Well, I worked that out. All right. Cool. So let's move on here to number 7. Ruben, what is your number 7?
My number 7. I mean, I love every card on this list. I was going through the elementals, and I'm like, I love every elemental. Like, elementals that aren't on my list, like Plumeveil. I was like, I want to find room for Plumeveil. Like, why? Where's my? I talked about Regal Force already. That's a one I absolutely love. But I think that this is probably the card on my list that I personally love the most. It makes me feel good to think about this card. It makes me feel good to cast this card. I played a deck named after this card for a while. I played elementals that had this card in it as like a top end card for a while. Nothing makes me feel better than like casting Momentary Blink or casting Void Walk or using a Mist Meadow Witch on a Revell Ark.
Yeah.
Revell Ark is it just makes me feel warm and fuzzy. It makes me feel like what Revell Ark looks like inside. Revell Ark is 4 colorless and a white, originally from Morningtide, reprinted a bunch of times as sort of the standard bearer for the Morningtide set in Modern Masters, Ultimate Masters, and a couple of Commander expansions. It's a 4/3 with flying for 5 mana, with Evoke of 5 colorless and a white, which is as you may play this spell for its Evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. And when Revell Ark leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This was used in a number of ways over the years, just sort of as a value engine in a number of strategies. It was also as a combo kill with Mirror Entity, Body Double, and Venser Shaper Savant, among others.
He said Savant.
I like saying it that way when I'm talking about Venser Shaper Savant. Usually I say Savant, but it's also been in a ton of those Malira decks. Birthing Pod loved this card. It saw play briefly in Hulk decks, just to be able to get more stuff out of your graveyard. It can rebuy a Kiki Jiki and a Deceiver Exarch to kill your opponent out of nowhere. Revell Ark does so much that it inspired Vesper Lark, which came along in Modern Horizons to just sort of pay homage to Revell Ark once again.
So this was my number 8 because it actually saw play in Legacy Dredge for a minute. This was the insurance policy against miracles because you didn't want to overcommit because they would just terminus your whole board away. So you would dread return for a Revell Ark. They would remove the Revell Ark, and then you would bring back 2 Golgari Grave Trolls, because the Grave Trolls are showing as having 0 in the graveyard. And so you'd be like, okay, fine, deal with this. Oh, here's the couple 9/9s for you. Do it again. And so I remember I famously did this against Joe Lissette one day when he was streaming Miracles, and he was a very good sport about it. He was like, what? Like, it was like a read the card kind of moment. And I was like, do it again. And
That's
I have a couple copies here, because it's something I keep them, for a rainy day if I might need to bring these out again if the Miracles players get too crazy again.
So what in the hell is in that art? No one has ever
Thank
really
you.
figured
That's
out.
definitely something you have to look at it from different angles to be like, where's the head? Is there a head?
Jim Murray did a spectacular job with this art, but I don't think we're supposed to know what's going on with any of the elementals that are in the Lorwyn expansions. We're just supposed to look at them and be like, oh, that's pretty, and then have the it's like a Lovecraftian make a sanity check kind of deal.
As I recall, this was originally the artwork for Whismur, and they were like, wow, that looks really weird, and they just put it on a Revell Ark instead. and it's something else. It was some other card. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% if it was Whismur, but it was another card, and they moved it over because it was like super good for this weirdo creature. This weirdo creature that's so weird was part of a design test.
Right. I think this one was the art for Shine Wind.
Shine Wind. You're right.
Is what?
But and because you look at shining and it's in the wind.
Right.
But the idea that this weirdo creature can do so much was a design test, because the idea of bringing back things based on their power is awful. That's stupid. That's terrible Magic design, because Magic is throttled by this thing called the mana cost. It's not throttled by the power of the creatures. It's throttled by the mana cost. And when you just bypass the mana cost,
right,
like the Goblin Lackeys of the world, or whatever else you want to use as an example, though, you bypass mana cost, bad things happen, and that's what Revell Ark can do. That's why there's all sorts of weird things. That's why I spent an entire video like trying to explain how the body double combo worked. Like, it was completely ridiculous.
Yep.
And yeah, this card's amazing. All right. Let's move on here to Aaron. What is your number 7?
My number 7 is the card that got away. When I first came back to Magic the Gathering, I discovered an article by Gavin Verhey. He was writing a column on the mothership called Reconstructed, I think it was. And he had thrown together a deck using cards from Innistrad and Dark Ascension. And it had cards like Boneyard Worm, and it had cards like Gnaw to the Bone. And I took one look at this, and I hadn't played the game for years. I quit around like Urza's Saga, Urza's Legacy. I took one look at this list. I said, this is exactly what I want to be doing. I immediately ran to my local game store, and I bought a box of each. And I tried so hard to make this sort of graveyard Simic-y Sultai nonsense work, and it never really went anywhere. You would play like Kessig Cage Breakers and Ghoultree. But I tried so hard to make this card work, and it haunts me to this day. Although I can put it in my Muldrotha deck and everything's fine. My number 7 is Splinter Fright. So Splinter Fright is 2 and a green. It's a creature type elemental from Innistrad with trample. So it's a star, asterisk, trample. Splinter Fright's power and toughness is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. At the beginning of your upkeep, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So it requires a little bit of setup. You can't just slam it on turn 3, but we had cards like, we had Mulch. Yep. I think it was like Tracker's Instincts was another one. Dream Twist if you were really desperate. But you had to do a little bit of setup, and then this thing had Trample, and so it would just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I have it as an enabler in my Muldrotha EDH deck because you can just bring it back, and here's a really big beater to close out the game. I love the art on this, but I tried so hard to make this graveyard deck work. I think Kibler was the only one that had any sort of success with it, and it was for like one event only. But this is one of the cards that got me back into Magic, and now I'm the Dredge Queen.
Nice.
I love Splinter Fright. I wish that blue-green self-mill had been a thing in Standard, because it was because spider spawning was like the best draft strategy of all time. Like, it's just the most fun. Yeah, you'd play Armored Scabs, and then you would draft one Memories Journey, and you'd go to town. It was, and you got one Runic Repetition with your one Memories Journey, and then your Boneyard Worms were all 15/15s, and it was a delight. I never really worked in Standard, unfortunately, mostly because Delver of Secrets existed, among other things. But yeah, this is a really fun card. It is an engine and a finisher. It does all the things you want.
Right, it fuels itself. Like, it's weird. Like, these days, this design is fairly common in terms of like the card does a thing that also helps its other thing, right? Yes. But back then, particularly during Innistrad, that was kind of crazy. You're like, wait a minute, not only do I get the top half, it's also milling me 2 every turn? That's fantastic. So that was really cool to kind of start to see that the enablers are on the enabled creatures and not just like 2 weird different spells you have to put together anymore.
Right.
Which was nice. For my number 7, we kick it old school, and we go all the way back to 2007. And in 2007, there was a very special card made for a very special author named Jamie Wakefield. And Jamie Wakefield, unfortunately, had lost his wife to cancer. And what they had done as a tribute to his spouse, he got to show off Timbermare. And Timbermare wreaks such lovely havoc, as it were. For a green and 3 generic mana, it is a 5/5 rare elemental with haste and echo of a green and 5 generic mana, which which means at the beginning of your upkeep, if this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, sacrifice it unless you pay its echo cost. And when Timbermare comes into play, tap all other creatures. So this was not only a really cool card that didn't always kind of get there, but it was kind of fun in Cube for a while.
Yeah.
But really, the idea that his wife, the lovely Mare, passed away from ovarian cancer in 2006, and in this extremely rare move from Wizards, they made a tribute for her, which I thought was fantastic. So this was, kind of the whole package. It's particularly back then during, this is 2007. I'd been making the Magic show for like a year, maybe year and a half. So it was definitely one of those like come together. The community really felt it. It was really heartfelt. There was nothing weird or there was nothing pretentious about it. This was like honest to God. Like he lost his wife. Here's something we can do for him. He was the Green Mage. It's awesome.
Exactly. And this was part of a medium competitive deck with things like Groundbreaker and like Uktabi Drake, I think was in like, there's just like a green stompy deck that existed for about half a second. Mm-hmm. We talked about this card. This was our shared number one, if I recall correctly, of like the best like cards that reference stuff or the best tribute cards or something like that.
Something like that.
And yeah, Timbermare, also calling back to Thundermare, which was a rare from, I want to say, Stronghold, that was this but red and no echo and just cost 6 instead of having echo. But yeah, this was a great tribute, a fun card, and just a really cool thing all the way around, and nice to reference in our Elementals episode.
Thundermare coming from Weatherlight.
Weatherlight.
And or Portal. I'm not sure which one came first.
Probably
I guess Portal.
Weatherlight.
But from Weatherlight, it was a red and 5 generic mana for a 5/5 that has haste, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap all other creatures. I assure you, was it 1999 or 1998? Me was like super pumped by this card.
That card is bonkers.
Card's super sweet. All right, let's move on here to our number 6. Ruben, what's your number 6?
My number 6. Look, here's the deal. Y'all aren't going to bring up cards from Red Deck Wins. And I got to bring up cards from Red Deck Wins, and we've got a good one.
You feel real dumb when you get to my number 2.
Ooh, I guess so. Well, one of the cards from the history of Red Deck Wins that makes me feel it in my jimmies. You know what I mean? It rustles my jimmies. I feel it in the cockles of my heart. It makes me feel good, and also it's well named. I believe that our friend A.E. Marling named this card because nothing really feels like it's running away out of control quite like a Runaway Steam Kin.
Nice.
And so it's really well named on that front. Runaway Steam Kin, colorless and a red, from the Guilds of Ravnica expansion, still in standard at the time of this filming. Whenever you cast a red spell, if Runaway Steam Kin has fewer than 3 +1/+1 counters on it, you put a +1/+1 counter on Runaway Steam Kin. It starts to 1/1. Does not stay there very long. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Runaway Steam Kin, add red, red, red. So, man, common play pattern is play this on turn 2, turn 3, play your third mountain, 1-drop, 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 attack for 4, remove all the counters, light up the stage, 1-drop, 1-drop, 3 more counters. Like this with Experimental Frenzy, you go crazy. This with Skirk Prospector, you go crazy. You can just play your entire hand, your entire deck, much less if you have 2 of them going at the same time. I love me a Runaway Steam Kin.
I've gushed about this card before. This is a card that makes me want to play red. I play Magic to feel things, and I don't feel anything when I'm turning things sideways, like, here's your 4. I don't feel anything when I throw a lightning bolt at something, but I feel something when you're doing that sort of combo-esque, here's a thing, make a red, burn a red, that's my thing. And so, cards like Experimental Frenzy and this, an engine in red, yes, that makes me feel something. And so, this compared with, for Modern, it was like Fiery Temper, and then this, and then Manamorphose, like that's my jam. And so I love this card because it made me want to play mono red. When I would never play it if it was goblins. I would never play it if it was Mardu whatever. Like I'm not doing that, or whatever's going on with vehicles or something. This, I will absolutely play this.
This is one of those cards that looks for me personally, I didn't read very strong. I didn't think this, I thought it was good. It's probably good. But it's stupid. All right, here's the stupid part. Okay, here's where it went from okay, this card's good to this card is stupid. This is the stupid moment was when they removed the counters, added mana to the mana pool, played something else, and it got another counter.
Immediately fed itself back up.
Oh my god, that just felt ridiculous. That just felt like unfair.
Yep.
You're gonna make it smaller. Oops, it's gotten a little bit bigger. Oops, it's gotten bigger still. And then with Experimental Frenzy, you're just you're just completely. And 2 of these things. Oh my god.
Yeah, chugga.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, this card is terrific and one of the best red spells ever made. They pushed the hell out of this card. Like they pushed it real good.
Love it.
All right.
Cockles.
Salt and pepper. Salt and pepper would write a song about how good this card is pushed. Aaron, what's your number 6?
I hate my number 6.
Ooh.
But
listening.
I can't deny the power level of this card. This is a shout out to my friend Caleb, who is a very dear friend of ours that recently moved to Texas. He's somebody that we used to play Commander with quite frequently. And this was his baby. This was the Commander that he would always whip out. And it's one of those cards where just when you think you know what it does, it does. You don't even know. You thought you knew everything, and then it did something completely busted, and you'd have to read it again and again. Number 6 is Morath, Will of the Wild. So Morath, Will of the Wild costs Naya, 1 red, 1 green, 1 white. And I'm going to read this all to you. And I'm going to make sure we're all understanding here. It's a legendary creature, Elemental Beast 0/0. Okay, hold on to your butts. Morath, Will of the Wild, enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. We good so far? Okay. You can pay X, remove X +1/+1 counters, and choose one. Put X +1/+1 counters on target creature. X cannot be 0. Morath deals X damage to any target. X can't be 0. Create an XX green elemental creature token. X can't be 0. Do you know how many times I've had to read this card? Where like you slide it over and you're like, okay, yeah, got it. And then you're playing your game. The Morath player does something and you're like, how is it able to do that? Oh, it's right there. Like, why does this card do so much?
Yeah. It does a lot.
You break it with doubling season. There are so many dumb things that you can do with this card. And I'm a smart person. I can read. And like, there have been so many times where I'm like, even now, like I'm willing to bet if we played a game right now, you would probably pull some trick out of your hat that I wouldn't see coming because there are so many things you can do with this card. And this card is obnoxious.
This card is smarter than I am. It's smarter than everybody is, to be honest. I borrowed Phil DeLuca of the Commander in Podcast's Morath deck for their monthly Commander meetup down at the Dragon and Meeple in Los Angeles. And I got a Mana Echoes in play with this card.
Oh my god.
Which was a lot of colorless mana. If you don't know how that works, go do some math real quick. It took me about 15 minutes to kill everybody because I didn't realize how much mana I had.
Yeah.
All the doubling effects, all of the counters effect. It's a lot. This card is ridiculous.
This card is brilliant in that that first line, which is you put counters on it equal to the amount of mana spent to cast it. That doesn't say command zone.
Correct.
That doesn't have to tell you that you're paying more for your commanders. No. You kind of do that click and you go, oh, the commander tax means this is even better next time. That's incredible.
Yep.
And then you have that entire toolbox to do whatever you want with it. And for what it's worth, I'm actually very, very happy that this doesn't have the full Oracle text on it. Do I need to be told that X can't be 0 3 times? For real?
Right.
I don't think that's necessary. But overall, this is a super cool commander. Honestly, it's less than $1. I'm kind of shocked, really, for how cool and fascinating this card I think tends to be.
People don't need to be playing this.
Right.
Good.
And Naya is a color combination you don't see a ton of in Commander.
No.
And so Morath, I probably maybe tied with like Maya L or Uril the Miststalker. My guess would be that Morath is the most popular of the Naya commanders. I would wager.
Sure. So, for my number 6, this is a card we've spoken about previously. This is a card that's weird and strange. Now, it's elemental, so they're all kind of weird and strange in their own way. With all sorts of fiddly bits and weirdo stuff. It's like $1 these days. It's not even that expensive, but it was super fun. This was a card that at the time I could not believe was seeing play. Because you're like, wait a minute, we're in the Lorwyn days, right? And in Lorwyn, they had these things called Vivid Lands. And not only past the Vivid Lands, they had this thing called Reflecting Pool, which was stupid because they made mana costs don't matter anymore, which means you got to play a card like Cloud Thresher along with a Cryptic Command.
Yeah.
That was insane. That remains insane, and that's still stupid, okay? Cloud Thresher is 4 green mana, 4 pips, and 2 generic mana. So a 6 mana total for a 7/7 flash reach. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to each creature with flying and each player. Or you can evoke it and do a mini sort of hurricane, as it were, for 2 green and 2 generic mana. Again, you may cast it for its evoke cost. If you do, it's sacrificed when it enters the battlefield. So it will kill some fairies sometimes, or it would kill a lot of fairies and stick around as a 7/7 monster a lot of the times.
Or it could hump on a dragon sometimes. Or if your opponents were playing as me and I had Spectral Procession and Mirror Weave in the same deck, you would accidentally kill yourself. Because a very common play pattern would be, I attack with my 3 Spectral Procession tokens, and they're like, evoke Cloud Thresher, and tap out, and then I would Mirror Weave their Cloud Thresher and deal them 21, which was not fun for them. Cloud Thresher, however, really, really, really good in Standard in a number of different decks. The decks that it was supposed to be in, like the Into the North red-green ramp decks, and then, of course, the decks that, for some reason, Wizards didn't realize were going to happen, the Vivid Lands decks. 6 mana, 7/7 flash is just a huge monster beastie. Being able to, yep, even to this day, being able to clear out the tiny flyers was a big deal. Being able to deal 2 was a big deal because you could take out 2 Scions of Una at the same time. Yeah, this card's really great.
Yeah, this card's super sweet, super fun. Yeah, again, this is not an expensive card. I think, honestly, there's just too many pips to make this thing work anywhere else but a crazy standard environment. That's right. Takes a lot to make a mana.
It takes a lot to make a mana. Yeah, there we go. I like it.
My number 5 is higher on someone else's list, but that's okay. Ruben, what's your number 5?
We're into the nitty gritty now. My number 5 is I think it's the only one in my top 5 that didn't win a Pro Tour and isn't in the cube. I'm like both at the same time. I'm pretty sure. But it has seen a ton of play, continues to see a ton of play, continues to be a pretty expensive card. It was pushing like ridiculous numbers before it was in Modern Masters 2015 and then once again in Ultimate Masters. My number 5 is Fulminator Mage. Fulminator Mage is a colorless and then a black-red hybrid and a black-red hybrid, so 3 mana total for a 2/2. It's an elemental shaman. Sacrifice Fulminator Mage, destroy target non-basic land. Has seen a ton of play in a ton of different decks, a ton of different sideboards and main decks. These days, pretty much living in those living end decks, but also had a great time in various Jund decks and various junk decks, lots of toolbox kind of strategies. It was also just a card that you were happy to have, even especially in the older formats as the non-basic lands became even more and more relevant.
Yeah, this is essentially, pillage or whatever on a stick kind of thing, where this also, I believe, is Arcade Post's last Magic art, or one of his last.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Interesting.
Because he signed a lot of these, he modded a lot of altered a lot of these and whatnot over the years. When Modern Masters first came out, and this was not on it, this was not in that set. Oh my God, these things were like $40 or $50. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah. I remember when I built Living In, I started off with a budget list, and I was using Avalanche Riders because I wasn't sure I wanted to commit to a modern deck. And once I knew that Living In was where I wanted to be, I kind of plunked down the money and spent, $30 to $40 a piece, and was very glad that I did. They were a great investment, and as long as Tron is a thing, and as long as the mana bases are greedy as hail, you absolutely want to be using Fulminator Mage.
I would wager that this is probably the elemental that has seen the most play in competitive decks.
Maybe.
I would say
over time.
Over time, because it saw play in Standard, and then it saw more play in Modern, and has continued to see a ton of play all over the place. I could be wrong, and I usually am, but...
Aaron, what's number 5?
My number 5 is a card that I got to enjoy in the previous Standard as a way to stick it to the burn deck, sorry Ruben, and was also great in the Explore decks as a way to, it was good to sort of as a value creature, but it got even better when you paired it with a little card called Bolus's Citadel. My number 5 is Wild Growth Walker. So Wild Growth Walker is 1 and a green. It is from Ixalan. It's a creature elemental with 1 power and 3 toughness, got a big old luscious leafy booty on it. Yeah. And it says whenever a creature you control explores explores, put a +1/+1 counter on Wild Growth Walker, and you gain 3 life. So on its own, it's fine. If you're just playing sort of a value black-green Golgari Explorer deck, you'll take it. But when you pair it with Bolas' Citadel, you're playing these sort of Jade Light Rangers that you're running, 4 to 8 copies of. You're playing them, you're paying life to play them. And if you have even just 1 or 2 of these out, or even just 1, you're gaining life every time it explores, which keeps the Bolas' Citadel chain going. And so for the month or 2 that like Citadel was good, I had some very good times with this, some very obnoxious board states of 40, 50, 60 life was not out of the question. And then you would just keep it going, and then you'd sacrifice them all to your Bolas' Citadel. And this card was amazing.
This card was my number 8 because I love this card in that I appreciate this card so much in that it literally, for a brief period, it ran the format. This card ran standard. There was nothing you could do that didn't include, what do I do about the Explore deck? Because Wild Growth Walker was in it. And it doesn't look like it's going to show up in older formats, even Pioneer, let alone Modern.
Right.
But
we're running like Chokotli's Honor Guard to like deal with the Explorer creature.
I was using...
Stop it.
Yeah, I mean, when I was playing Red, it was like, can you kill the turn 2 Wild Growth Walker? No? I guess you're dead. Right? Because even as a 2/4, you can't deal with it.
Yeah, you're done. That's it. When it was 3/5, it's over.
I mean, I've seen like 7/9 Wild Growth Walkers. It gets this card is an engine into and of itself. It's funny that this card didn't see a ton of play up until a very specific point, which was rotation. And then it just saw all the play, and everyone ran 4 Merfolk Branch Walkers, 4 Jadelight Rangers, and maybe Seeker's Squires, right? Like, there was a minute there where the format was so aggressive, I was using the O3, the Ixali's Diviners, because they didn't die to a shock with this card. Wild Growth Walker is such a spectacular entrant, and it's not played alongside the other elementals. Right? It's not, it isn't...
Right, it's not like a tribal creature.
Right.
It is, in fact, a very specific, and they gave you Branchwalker, and they gave you Jadelight Ranger, and then Wizards, they decided to make a Challenger deck, you see? And they called it Deadly Discovery, and inside it is 4 Wild Growth Walker, and also inside it are 2 Jadelight Rangers. Because, that's what you play with the best Explorer creature enabler ever, is 2 of that rare. So we got 2 Jadelight Rangered in that little release, which I thought was kind of bad.
But Wild Growth Walker, it was spectacular.
It's just a hell of a card, and I love it, and I couldn't have a top 10, didn't have it on it, based on the complete dominance it had once rotation happened. It was, oh God, how do we stop this thing? All right, let's move on here. Again, my number 5 is higher on someone else's list. Let's move here to number 4. Ruben, what's your number 4?
My number 4, it's not often that we talk about Dragon's Maze, but when we do, we talk about one card, and that card is Voice of Resurgence.
It's true.
And Voice of Resurgence is a spectacular Magic card, and it's an elemental, and it makes an elemental.
He's also our co-host.
That's true. It is also our co-host. That is Evan. #**. Voice of Resurgence is a green and a white mana for a 2/2 elemental, a mythic from Dragon's Maze, still hovering around $14 or so for your copies. Whenever an opponent casts a spell during your turn, or when Voice of Resurgence dies, create a green and white elemental creature token with, quote, this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. And of course it has that Celestia watermark. Famously, this is the one that swapped art with Imara Tandris, or swapped text boxes with Imara Tandris. Because originally the first Imara wasn't going to be a 5/7 for 7. This art was. But then they switched it at the last second. This is not legendary. A huge part of a ton of different decks from, all types of toolbox strategies, Bant company kind of decks. This thing just sees play in everything. Everything mid-range, everything that wants to have some sort of mid-range game, this is a card that's in it.
Yeah, and this card was so necessary because, the control decks in Standard were really, really good. And, this was really a great way to sort of deal with them. If you want to do anything on our turn, this was sort of like Teferi before Teferi, of like just sort of forcing the control decks to play at sorcery speed. And if you wanted to kill it, you have this insurance policy of, okay, well, I'm going to have all these creatures and then I'll make this token and you still have to deal with that too. And God help you if you're playing any sort of birthing pod strategy, because you can choose to kill this thing, and it's obnoxious.
Yeah, this was my number 5. I was off by only 1. If you do Google up Evan Irwin Voice of Resurgence, you will see my Kristen Plesko illustrated token, which is absolutely fantastic. This card in and of itself is a good, you point to Dragon's Maze and you say it's a terrible set. You say, why is it a terrible set? You're like, well, okay, everyone cared about one card. It was a 2-mana 2/2. Yep. And they did this weird pushing in all these weird directions of it hates on counterspells and it also hates on wraths at the same time, and it's cheap, so you don't play multiples, so that's not going to like weirdly warp things. You're going to definitely want to play 4 of these, so it's going to help. It helps sell the set because the set is bad, because you want this 2-mana 2/2 that's like super overpowered compared to literally anything else that set was doing.
Right, that you could be doing.
Like, it is miles better than everything else in Dragon's Maze. It's not even close. And of course, I have a personal connection with this thing, which I think is awesome. And it's a great card that, Pioneer is right back at it. Voice of Resurgence is going to be playing again. That's terrific. Aaron, what's number 4?
My number 4 is a card that I try not to leave the house without. I first discovered this card as part of Living End, which you've talked about a couple times so far. But, when you play the decks that I play, people just can't let you be happy. They got to try to rain on your parade. And so you got to come correct. You got to come with some answers. And my number 4 is just a great, efficient answer to a lot of the things that people try to put in my way. My number 4 is Ingot Chewer. So Ingot Chewer is 4 colorless and a red. It's a creature type elemental with 3 power and 3 toughness. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. Fun fact, it does not destroy Darksteel ingots. That's kind of a little flavor fail there.
They just choose on it.
It's true. It's a little nosh, a little nuzzle. You can also just pay the evoke cost of 1 red, which is right up my alley, to destroy a target artifact, and then you sacrifice it afterwards. And so this is good for your Grafdigger's Cages. This is good for if you're playing against any sphere effects. This is a great way to destroy those as well. And it also plays really well with Bridge from Below. If you have nothing to do, you just sort of play it. And that's one way you can get through something, and you just get some zombie tokens and you beat somebody to death. And so if you're playing Living End, obviously you get the value out of the ETB. It dies, you bring it back again, which is a great answer to the Affinity decks or possibly the Urza decks that are running around. But the ability to convert this to just a 1-mana answer to something, the fact that it's a creature means that you can't Spell Pierce it, you can't Flusterstorm it, and so it has to be a hard counterspell. And so this is a really great way to fight hate, and it also forces people to have a very specific answer to this card. And sometimes you just cast it and it's fine.
And the fact that its casting cost is 5 means that Chalice on 1 does not stop it, which is a huge deal for Living End and for Dredge and a ton of different decks. I remember playing right when Lorwyn was released. I was in a proxy vintage tournament where you were allowed to play 15 proxies, I think. And one of the players had all the power and all of the stuff, but needed to proxy his Ingot Chewers. Wow. And I just remember that. It was just very funny.
Well, what I remember is that there were 2 cards in particular that over the course of sort of time and watching vintage, I was most surprised at seeing play. One of them was Ingot Chewer, because, back then this was Lauren or whatever. Like, this card was like trash. This card was like draft trash. No one played this thing in draft, let alone in constructed. What? Mm-hmm. But it's just that exact mana cost it needs to be. It has a high mana cost, so it gets around the challenge or whatever. And the second card that blew me away was Slash Panther. Slash Panther, seeing play in vintage, blew my mind. For those who don't know, Slash Panther is a common from New Phyrexia. It's a red Phyrexian mana and 4 generic mana. It is a 4/2 haste. That's it. That's the card. That's all. And that somehow solved vintage play because it had haste and power.
It was good at knocking down Jace the Mind Sculptors.
It was, and that's what it needed to do. So I thought that was great. My number 4 is my last entry until number 1. Both my number 3 and number 2 are higher.
Wow.
Someone else's list, so that kind of sucks in many ways. But I definitely wanted to have in the top 5 this card in particular. Now, Wizards has done, I think, a much better job. I guess it depends on Ixalan, how you want to feel about that one. But they've done a fairly well job at taking tribes and then doing something really interesting with them. Now, if we're going to talk about elementals, well, there's a bunch of elementals you can talk about. It's like, it's the big dog, the one you want to talk about, the one on top of the mountain, Well, while there are multiple versions of Omnath, and one of them is very expensive because it comes from Worldwake or whatever, which is great, the one that they just printed was Omnath, Locus of the Royal. And oh man, and it's just the most elementy of elemental cards. It fuses elementalness. It has a fantastic deck that you can build around it that's super fun. It's like tier 3. It's never really going to get there, but it's super fun. Omnath, Locus of the Royal was printed as a mythic rare in M20. It is a red, a blue, a green, and a generic mana. They fully said, like, look, this is not Sultai. This is Temur. Temur is going to be the elemental colors from this set moving forward, at least in terms of what they did in M20. And it says so this 4 mana is a 4 mana 3/3 legendary creature elemental. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. Okay, sweet. It's count elementals. All right. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control, and if you control 8 or more lands, draw a card. This card is ridiculous.
Just does so much. My fondest memories of this card are, of course, during the M20 Streamers Early Access event, when you could build up the Elementals deck and go to town. It's best friends with Risen Reef, it's best friends with Thunderkin Awakener, and a bunch of the other M20 and 3 mana Chandra that makes little 1/1 elementals, triggers this thing a ton. You can still just play Cloudkin Seer or whatever that card is with your Omnath. Just a really great card. It does so much. It's a Flame Tongue Kavu. It's a card draw engine. It makes things bigger. It slices it, dices it, julienne fries. It might get back in there someday. Mid-range elementals, we'll see. But yeah, this card's a ton of fun.
I mean, just putting, like, when you play a land, put a counter and draw a card, like, that is just the most ridiculous feeling. You're like, I am up so far by doing nothing but playing a land. That's amazing. Let's move on here to a number 3. Aaron, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is the last higher on my list.
Fair enough. Ruben, what's your number 3?
It's the only higher on my list.
Ooh, number 3 gets passed by entirely for number 2. I'll tell you what. And I still don't have one. Aaron, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is a card. Shout out to my friends Daniela Diaz and my friend Lauren Mulligan, #TransMafia. They are huge fans of this card. This card is just an unassuming little number and has seen play in both Modern and Pauper, where it is an all-star in the Is It Blitz decks. This was in some of the early versions of what was known as Suicide Blue before we kind of figured out what Death's Shadow was and the best way to build that. This is a card that is just so harmless looking until it isn't and you're just dead. I'm not normally a red mage, but it is always a pleasure to watch this card and this sort of style of deck go off. My number 2 is Kiln Fiend. So Kiln Fiend is 1 colorless and a red. It's a creature type elemental beast with 1 power and 2 toughness. What's so bad about that? It's just a cute little puppy. He's on fire, little tail, rawr. Whenever you cast an instant or a sorcery spell, Kiln Fiend gets +3/+0 until end of turn. So you pair this together with a bunch of cantrips. Oh, or I don't know, some Phyrexian mana like Gitaxian Probes, Mutagenic Growths. This thing can kill you in the blink of an eye. And I love it. I love this sort of style of almost like a Red Bogles deck or a Voltron deck. And there's nothing sweeter than just killing somebody with this card out of nowhere. It just feels so good.
Yeah, this card in particular, it created its own archetypes, and this one very much surprised me. I was like, wait, Kiln Fiend? That's a draft card from Rise of Eldrazi you don't even play. And you're like, whoa, wait, what to do? What? And Phyrexian mana who? And you just and you can just destroy people.
Apostle's Blessing? I mean, it's dumb.
And of course, Temur Battle Rage nowadays to just completely knock people off their keister. Kiln Fiend is one of the cards that was added to Magic Arena for the historic format. And so, there's a very, very, very short list of cards from the history of Magic the Gathering that they went out of their way to code into Magic Arena for historic, and Kiln Fiend is one of them because of those archetypes.
Very nice. All right. Ruben, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is, we've talked a lot about bad sets today. And we've talked a lot about, Dragon's Maze. We've done Shadowmoor. I had a Torment card. Eventide isn't great either. but it is from Lorwyn Shadowmoor block, and so there are a bunch of powerful elementals from those days. And this is one of the ones that, it eventually kept getting more and more play and saw more and more dominance and more love, and then eventually won a Pro Tour. It's the only elemental to win a Legacy Pro Tour back at the Pro Tour 25th anniversary in Minneapolis last year in Death and Taxes, because my number 2 is Flicker Wisp.
Oh.
Colorless white gets you a 3/1 elemental with flying. So 3/1 flying for 3 mana already. And when it enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This thing does so much. Oh my gosh. It resets your opponent's Ether Vials. It completely gets rid of 20/20 Merit Lage tokens or 2/2 zombies. It can get rid of an Ensnaring Bridge for a Alpha Strike. It can reset a Chalice of the Void. This thing does so much for so little of the opportunity cost, because you kind of want to have an evasive big power flyer anyway. And Flicker Wisp, uncommon, never saw a ton of play, but steadily over time, more and more play. I love Blinking. Blinking goes really well with other elementals. It's just great.
This card is infuriating, and especially if you pair it with Either Vial, you have a way to sort of blink your creatures out if they're facing any sort of removal. A lot of the Death and Taxes creatures have ETB triggers like Recruiter of the Guard, Stoneforge Mystic. Card is just dumb. And Death and Taxes is really great at kind of gumming up the board, and if you pair this, a Flicker Wisp with Mom can handle a Grizzlebrand, just pro black of it just blocks it for days. It's just infuriating.
The card's great. The card's weird. It's it almost feels like there's a few design mistakes that kind of just sneak through every once in a while, particularly with these older sets. And this one to me says exile another target permanent, not non-land.
Yep.
Just permanent. And when you can reset lands, I know it's weird, it's a small thing, but Wizards just does not give you that ability. Go back and look in the last 5-10 years and see how many times they've let you target lands with certain activated or into the battlefield abilities. It's very, very rare. And Flicker Wisp being able to kind of mess with your opponent's stuff is awesome. It's kind of what you want Death and Taxes to do. Just be and block your Grizzlebrand.
It's all about hitting pressure points, right? Yeah. You just sort of put your opponents off balance until they die. No individual card in Death and Taxes is going to kill you by itself. It's all about, this thing costs 1 more. Oh, this thing has protection for the rest of the turn. Oh, this thing's gone for just a turn. This thing has just protection from a third of your deck. But all of it stacked up together, like a martial artist, just puts you off balance until you get this weird amalgamation of Death and Taxes, mono white control that can just shut down entire metagames.
Let's turn the corner here to number 1. Aaron, what's your number 1?
I thought long and hard about my number 1, and I tried really hard not to pick cards I hadn't already picked before, but no card, this could only be the number 1. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that life imitates art, in that when you look at the card and you read the flavor text and you look at how it performs in competitive atmospheres where it's really, really good, and then it dies. But it never really dies. It comes back again and again and again. There is a small but devoted following that this card has that just wants this card to be good. This is all people want to be doing, and it is just one of the purest things in the world. My number 1 is Vengevine. So Vengevine's 2 colorless and 2 green. It's a creature type elemental with haste and 4 power and 3 toughness. Whenever you cast a spell, if it is the second creature spell you cast this turn, you may return Vengevine from your graveyard to the battlefield. And we see it creep up. It was waiting in Modern for a while, and then Hogak came around, and then it was the hotness, and then Hogak got banned, and it went right back in the box. And now they're playing around with Hedron Crab, and there's a fringe Sultai deck in Modern, and it's seeing a little bit of play. Same thing in Legacy. They're doing Hogak Depths now, where you can sort of do the sort of Vengevine thing. Because it was banned in Modern, they're taking their business elsewhere. Vintage, we had Survival of the Fittest. That was a thing for 6 months to a year. Nobody really plays Vengevine Vengevine anymore because Oath is seeing a lot more play, and so Vengevine goes right back in the ground. And then just cut to the other day, there's a weird bizarre list that's seeing play that's running this and like Memnites for God's sakes. And so, just when you think Vengevine is down, just when you think nobody's going to play it anymore, give it like 6 months or so and it'll come creeping right back, just like the flavor text. It says leave but a shred of root and it will return bursting with vigor, and it does every single time.
This is the reason why Survival of the Fittest is banned in Legacy, partially. Because this created just such a ridiculous engine alongside things like Basking Root Walla that you can play for free, which now Memnite you can play for free to be able to fulfill the same purpose. Vengevine, one of the bigger hyped cards coming out of World Wake as well. It's Rise of the Eldrazi, which it's a great way to answer a Jace the Mind Sculptor in Standard, and then of course you play a zillion 4/3s in your Hollow Vine decks with Hollow 1, or your Basking Root Wallas and your Noble Hierarchs in Survival and Legacy. It's always right there on the fringe, and it's always this close to being broken, and it's always a ton of fun when it does.
And there's so many ways to do it. Like, you can do it with Hedron Crab, Hollow Ones. If you just want to play a fair game, just cast some Deathrite Shamans. There's just so many ways to do it. And I love that there's just sort of this committed group that's all they want to do in life. They just want to bring back their 4/3s, and I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, this is sort of a $15 card right now from Ultimate Masters. This was another one of those cards that kind of blew up in terms of value. And
30 to 40 for a while.
Yeah, they finally reprinted it in Ultimate Masters ever since Rise of the Eldrazi.
Well, it was like a PTQ promo or something, too, for a while there.
It was a World Magic Cup qualifier.
Yeah, and I thought that would kind of help out with no. It was fine.
Nah, promos like that are never printed enough to really kind of move the needle. And Vengevine it's a card that, it does this weird little thing, and it's free. Mm-hmm. And so when it does a weird little thing in the graveyard, almost incidentally in many ways, and of course, you can build around it, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of there, and then it triggers. It's not, you need to find it to put it there. It's like, well, it's kind of just there. So I'm gonna do this and this, and oh my god, I got a free thing. So Vengevine was my number 2. Like, this was definitely up there for me. This was, I thought, one of the biggest, most important elementals ever printed. Was super cool. Even in Rise of the Eldrazi, people were just waiting. Like, you could tell it was good, right? You could tell it was powerful. It was just, what's it gonna go in? What does it take? And like the first time I ever saw it was with Survival of the Fittest, I was like, oh my god, like that card's gonna get banned. There's no way you're gonna let this crazy interaction of getting free 4/3 haster guys just that's what your format is, and that's exactly what happened. You got to play your flavor of survival, control survival, combo survival, or aggro survival, all thanks to Vengevine. And people were saying, oh, but they should ban Vengevine. It's like, no. You don't ban the gas, you ban the engine. And Vengevine's always going to be gas, as it were. Ruben, what's number 1?
My number 1 is a card that has done it all. It has won a Pro Tour. Actually, it won Worlds in the hands of Uri Peleg at Worlds in 2007 when Evan and I were there in New York when he beat Patrick Chapin and his Dragonstorm deck with Doran Rock. If you're going to have a number 1 of the Elementals list, you're going to be hard-pressed to not choose an Elemental from Lorwyn block. And my number 1 is an Elemental from Lorwyn block. It was always a first pick. It's seen play in a ton of different decks over time, from Mannequin to just rock decks. It sees play even outside of Elemental strategies. You just play it in Elves. You see it in Quick and Toast. You see it in Pod decks. You see it all over the place. My number 1 is Shriekmaw. Shriekmaw, 4 colorless and a black. Uncommon elemental originally from Lorwyn. It's a 3/2 with fear, which means that this creature can't be blocked except for by artifact creatures and or black creatures. It evokes for colorless and a black, which is, of course, if you cast it for its evoke cost, you sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. And when it enters the battlefield, you destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. So you're able to terror something at sorcery speed for 2 mana, or for 5 mana, you get a 3/2 that's really tough to block. Printed in a ton of different commander expansions, always with this weird banana slug guy as the art. It was a Lorwyn promo back in the day as well. It was the release event promo because they knew it was going to be all over the place.
Oh,
And yeah, I mean, it's so ubiquitous. It's been all over the place. It'll continue to be all over the place because it's a great card.
My number 3, I first discovered this in Living End. Again, you do the ETB and then you can Living End and just do it all over again. Or if you need to pay 5, I have killed people with just a Shriekmaw before. In the Birthing Pod decks, the Birthing Pod decks tended to skew a bit more Abzan, and so you could go tutoring exactly for this. And then you would get your ETB effect. If you're playing anything like Muldrotha and EDH where you want permanent base removal, this is something that you can recur. You evoke it, you sacrifice it, and then the next turn, that's your creature that you cast for the turn, and then you just always have it. Or again, if you need that body, you can do that too. I am always happy to run a Shriekmaw. Unfortunately, the 2 mana makes it a little bit expensive for like Legacy and Vintage, which sounds weird, I know, but in the formats where it's good and in the decks where it's good, I'm always happy to have it.
You're so spoiled.
You also, for Vintage,
for 2 mana, I better get a back rub and a ride home.
For Vintage, it's tough too because it doesn't destroy artifact creatures.
Right.
True. I mean, Shriekmaw, this was my number 3. So we actually had 2 sames in this top 10, as Aaron and I both had it at number 3.
There you go.
Which I thought was really cool. This card, I don't believe it was it, I recall reading an article by Patrick Chapin at the time, and he was like, this card is bananas. This card is more value than you have ever been given in Magic up to this point. This card is amazing. Is good early, good late, is one of the all-stars. Like, Wizards used to give us one of the best cards of the set as the release promo.
Right.
This was the release promo, which you went to the release event and whatnot. On the release, they would give you a copy of this, which was great. All shiny, because you would play Shriekmaw in Standard. You would play Shriekmaw in Cube. You would play Shriekmaw everywhere you could play Shriekmaw. They have not printed... I don't think anything quite as close to this in terms of utility, in terms of mana cost.
No.
You play it early, play it late, you get a body you don't. It's absolutely fantastic. You blink it and it's insane. Shriekmaw is absolutely fantastic, but it was alongside what I'm sure is Ruben's number 3, and is my number 1. If you're going to have one Lorwyn card as number 1, well, why not just have the other one as another number 1? Now, I've got, many moons ago, I sold off sort of literally like 13 years of draft chaff. Okay, and I sold all to Card Hoarder. We are sponsored, #sponsored. But they bought my collection.
Right.
And I had, no joke, over 160 copies.
Why?
Of Muldrifter. You have no idea how many times I have drafted this card.
Yeah.
I drafted Lorwyn a lot. And I will never pass a Muldrifter. This card is unbelievable. Muldrifter is a blue and 4 generic mana for a 2/2 uncommon elemental, which was common, by the way. It was common in Lorwyn. This was a common card, for God's sakes. So 5 mana for a 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards, and you can evoke it for a blue and 2 generic mana. So for divination mana, you get a divination.
Yeah.
But that divination, while on the stack, could be blinked for yet another divination and a 2/2 flyer to stay around. Absolutely fantastic. This card is value on value. Oh my god. All right,
you played in Pauper, and you have sort of the the blink decks. This is what they play in Pauper Tron.
Right. Yeah,
like when you think about modern Tron, you're bringing out Wormcoil Engine, you're bringing out Karn, you're bringing out World Shaper, World Smash, World Eater, or whatever. In Pauper, oh no, this is what you're Tronning for. And then you play this with the, the mnemonic walls and all this ghostly flickers and things like that, and this card gets dumb.
Yeah.
This is Blake Rasmussen's favorite card, as I recall. And
it's
Cloud Blazer.
It's a lot of people's favorite cards, yeah.
Oh, for sure. He was talking about how Cloud Blazer was similar, and this is kind of sort of a callback to that. Muldrifter is... This, I think, was almost in the same article that Chapin was trying to explain. Like, you don't understand.
Right.
These evoke creatures are so crazy good. They're going to help define what Magic is for the next few years, honestly, for a very long time. And, of course, he was correct. And I can't say enough good things about Muldrifter. It's just, like, one of my favorite cards.
Yeah, Muldrifter is spectacular. That goofy fish flying over the field of wheat art is iconic at this point. It's dominated Pauper for a long time. It dominated Standard for a little while in the makeshift mannequin decks alongside Shriekmaw and, Shadow Mage Infiltrator and Mannequin and things like that. Momentary blinking a Muldrifter, boy, that feels good. Revell Arking a Muldrifter, boy, that feels good. Doing anything with a Muldrifter, just good living.
Good.
Yeah.
So good, clean living, and that is our top 10 elementals. You will see them on the screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Aaron's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we did not talk about. And we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate to CoolStuffInc.com. But before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
I think this show had the elements of a really good program, so I'm glad.
Elementary, my dear Ruben.
That was well done.
Nice. All right, we go to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching or listening. I hope you support us at patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at MagicMikes, on Twitter at MagicMikesCast, our Magic Mike subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Talk to us privately at MagicMikesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at MagicMikesPodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes or Spotify. Join us here next week. Same time, same place for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.